Hello, this video is just about getting started with the animal pose estimation software DeepLabCut, specifically for people who aren't very comfortable with programming. I'll just be showing you some helpful resources, going over some basic vocabulary, and then doing a short demo. So if you've never worked with a command line before or just don't feel comfortable diving headfirst into the DeepLabCut documentation, then you may find this video helpful. So first, I just want to make sure that you're aware of all of the resources you have at your disposal when it comes to learning to use DeepLabCut. The developers have provided a wealth of documentation and educational material, and they're always adding more content. Again, this video really just exists for people who might find the official documentation a bit technical at first glance. This right here is the DeepLabCut GitHub repository, where all of the code is hosted alongside with the documentation. There's a lot of content here, so I definitely recommend watching their How to Navigate the Documentation video in order to get started. That will walk you through how to find installation information, how to access the forum, the wiki, and other useful things of that nature. I also wanted to highlight a second repository, though, called DLC Utils. Over here, they maintain a list of other resources that you can use to process the output of DeepLabCut. And finally, because DeepLabCut uses Python, I just wanted to show you a good resource for learning more about that programming language, as having some Python knowledge can come in handy when you're using DLC. Python is very accessible for non-programmers. It's one of the easiest languages to get started with and learn, and this resource in particular is geared towards biologists. So now that I've touched on the other resources that you can take advantage of, I just wanted to show you DeepLabCut and explain a few terms along the way. There are 3 ways to use DeepLabCut as of right now, one of which is through the demo Jupyter notebooks and Google Colab notebooks, which you can find on the DLC GitHub repository. I won't be showing you that here, but they are great to check out for beginners because they have some notebooks containing demo data, so you can just see what it looks like when you run all the functions, and then others where you can plug in some of your own data. And it's a great way to check out the program before having to install it. Here, though, I will be showing you how to use DLC on your own computer once you've installed it. This is useful because even if you are planning on doing your training using cloud computing, like using Google Colab, I believe you still need to label your frames outside of Colab, so on your own computer like this, though who knows, that may change in the future. Anyways, to use DeepLabCut on your own computer, you will first need to locate the command line or the terminal. So for Mac, this is a program called Terminal, and for Windows, this will be Command Prompt or PowerShell. That being said, because I used the Anaconda installation method, which I believe is the most common installation method for DeepLabCut, so this may apply to you as well. But because of that, I am using Anaconda Prompt, because that lets me change my Anaconda environments very easily. So basically, a command line is just a place where you can type into your commands, and your computer will perform those in real time. And so we're going to be running DeepLabCut from here. And so I'll just briefly explain what these things mean in case you aren't familiar. This tells me what Anaconda environment I am in, and so we'll need to change that in order to start using DeepLabCut. And this right here just tells us what our current working directory is. A directory is basically just a folder, and the working directory is the folder that your command line is currently looking at or currently inside of. So on my hard drive, represented by the letter C, there is a directory called users, and inside of users there is a directory called shlu, and that's the directory I'm in right now. This isn't too important to know, but may be helpful. So to open DeepLabCut, I will first switch my Anaconda environment to the one I downloaded when I installed the program. Yours may have a different name. But then I will open up Python. And I believe for Mac users, the command should be Python W instead of IPython. And then finally, I will import DeepLabCut. And now we're ready to start working. So I mentioned earlier that there are currently 3 ways to use DLC, one of which is the pre-made notebooks. The second way is to run it directly from here. So I would type out a function for each thing I wanted DeepLabCut to do, like DeepLabCut.createNewProject, and then fill in the information needed to create the project here, and then hit enter and it would run that function. This way of doing things lets you explore all of the options you have available to you, and you may end up using this a little bit, but when getting started, you'll definitely want to use the third option, which is the GUI. So we launch the GUI by entering the function DeepLabCut.launchDLC. And so GUI stands for Graphical User Interface, and it just means that we have buttons to click and drop-down menus instead of having to type everything out by hand. So first, I'll just create a new project and put it on my desktop. The most important thing to make sure of when creating a new project is whether you're wanting to use single or multi-animal DeepLabCut. They each have a slightly different workflow, and it's a good idea to read up on the differences between each in the DeepLabCut documentation, just to see which one has the features that best fit your project. So you can see that this has now created a new folder on my desktop. In here we have the configuration file and all of the other directories that make up a DeepLabCut project. You can also see that once we made the project, the GUI now has all of these tabs. The tabs go in order of the DLC workflow, so just by proceeding from left to right, you're walking through all of the steps in order. If I were to continue with this project, I would then configure the project by changing the individuals' names if I were using multi-animal DLC. And this config.yaml file you can just open in any basic text editor. I would also want to change the labels of the body parts that I'm interested in labeling. And you can add to this list later, but you can't go back and change it. If you do add to it, you would need to relabel all of your frames with the additional body parts, create a new training set, train a whole new model, but that is possible to do within the same project. And once I've done that, maybe changed a few other settings, in the documentation you can see explanations for what all of these mean for the major parameters you might be interested in toggling with, but I would save this and I would go on to extracting frames from all of my videos. Also, another thing I wanted to mention is that even if you're using the GUI, you'll still want to keep an eye on your command line. There will be some output here every time you run a function, whether that's just letting you know that the function was completed successfully or that there was an error. All the GUI is basically doing is typing out each of those functions that I mentioned earlier for you. It's really the same thing behind the scenes. So jumping out of the GUI really quickly, I also wanted to show you how to check what version of DeepLabCut you're using. Do that by typing this command, DeepLabCut.version with 2 underscores around version, and if you go to the GitHub and you check the releases on the side of the page, you can see which release you're using and make sure that you're up to date. And then finally, the last thing that I wanted to show you was how to move your DeepLabCut project around. So if you need to move your project for any reason, you need to go back into the config.yaml file and change this file path to reflect the new location of the config.yaml file. So a file path is just a list of directories starting from somewhere like the hard drive of a computer and then ending at a specific folder or file in question. And on Mac, the file paths look slightly different, so just keep that in mind. This will be really important if you're doing your training in Google Colab, because you will need to move your project in and out of Google Drive, because you can't use the frame labeling or refining tracklets GUIs from Colab. And that was everything that I wanted to show you. Like I said, there's so many great resources for learning DeepLabCut. I just hope that this was helpful for you and could help you make that jump into feeling comfortable getting started working with the program. Best of luck with all of your projects.